Hey everyone, today I'm going to do something I've been wanting to do for weeks now. I'll be comparing the ALLMTN 2.0 with the XDURO Enduro 2.0 and help you decide which bike is better for you. So, why did I wait so long? Well, I had to wait for both bikes to be ready to roll. You see, the entire reason I bought the 2020 is so I wouldn't have any downtime while waiting for my ALLMTN to be repaired. But I'll explain that to you in an upcoming video, what to never do on your e-bike. That said, I'm an ex motocross champion. I tend to ride my bikes hard, and I've crashed this thing at least a half dozen times, and I'd love to tell about it. I've had this bike fully submerged in a pond after crashing down a ravine. I've been over the bars, and I've had a number of very bad pedal strikes. Not that riding an e-bike is an inherently dangerous or more dangerous than a regular mountain bike. In this case, I assure you it's the rider, but you'll have to take my word for that. For all the haters out there, a little disclaimer. Whether you're on an e-bike or an analog, they're both capable of doing the same speeds when going downhill, and you can clip your bars on a tree on either type of bike. Anyway, you'll have to wait for that video to find out which of those bad things didn't sit well with my Yamaha motor, but I can promise you Haibike USA has been amazing and they've helped me out with my Yamaha warranty issues that were probably my fault to begin with. First of all, I have to say both bikes have been amazing, and getting an e-bike has completely changed my life for the better. In fact, I'm probably going to do a video really soon about just how it's impacted my life and why I encourage everyone thinking about getting an e-bike to just go ahead and do it. All that said, I'm a huge fan of Haibike, and before I bought one, I did tons of research online and I watched every YouTube video I could find. Now, I like saving money as much as the next guy, but what I learned quickly was you have to pay a good amount of money to get a good mountain bike with quality components. I'm talking at least a few $1,000s if you can strike the right deal and if you want to do some technical single track. So, what I also found was the cheaper bikes, maybe 1 or 2 thousand bucks, uh, were typically heavier bikes with hub drive motors, which might be okay for the street or smooth dirt roads, but not really good for jumping or going downhill or down mountains with rough terrain. Um, where the weight distribution, and having the motor sitting in the middle and evenly balanced is critical. Also, the cheaper bikes usually have crummy components. This really narrowed down my choices to bikes with mid-drive motors, such as the Yamaha PWX and PX2, which is what you see here. Being a motocross racer and knowing I could buy a complete dirt bike with way more complexity than an e-bike, yet the e-bikes are just as expensive, was a really hard pill for me to swallow. It wasn't until I found a deal on Black Friday for nearly half the price that I finally pulled the trigger on the ALLMTN 2.0, and boy, am I happy I did. In fact, now that I have two and knowing what I do know, I wouldn't think twice about the price of these bikes. In fact, I paid much more for the Enduro, despite them being really similarly equipped. The bottom line is it was just worth it when considering what else is on the market for the same price. Now, if you start doing a bit of research like I did, you might find yourself looking at all the individual costs of the various components, and then you'll quickly see that things like good forks cost a lot of money. You'll also find the batteries on the bikes are upwards of $1,000 to replace, and the motor is similarly expensive. So right away, that's a couple grand of the total overall cost of the bike, with the rest of the expense going towards the name brand components. So basically you need to remember you're paying for cutting edge technology, and someday I would expect the prices to drop. Okay, enough about the financial stuff. Let's talk about these bikes. So on the left is the 2019 ALLMTN 2.0, which has about 620 miles on it, and it retailed for about 4,700 US dollars. But I got this bike for the staggering low price of 2,600 bucks on Black Friday. Now, before you get too excited, I've never seen this deal again. In fact, when I was looking for my second high bike recently, the best deal I could find for the same ALLMTN 2.0, which was now last year's model, was $4,100. And in my opinion, that's because this bike sold like hotcakes in the US. And I think that's because it's really well equipped for the price. And other brands that are similarly equipped will cost you easily 1 or 2 grand more. And, hey, in my opinion, I think the high bike is the most sexy of the bunch. I just love the design of these with the signature bend here at the top of the top tube. I can't tell you how many people compliment me on the trails that this all mountain bike is just gorgeous. So the bike just looks sharp and it's way more sharp in person. The videos just never do it justice. One thing you can't see, for example, is the bright red paint changes actually to orange in certain sunlight, and it's just gorgeous. I'll try to show you a picture of it here, but it probably won't do it justice. These bikes, they just look more beefy than some of the more pricey brands, which have the integrated batteries in the down tube, which, by the way, Haibike also has with both Bosch and Yamaha options. But the big feel of the All Mountain here, uh, with the bigger than normal 2.8 tires, I think it's why so many motocross riders, in particular, actually prefer these. I feel like I'm on my dirt bike when I'm riding this thing, really. Personally, I just like the big look of them too. And for me, it's sort of reminiscent of when I first saw a Cannondale street bike in the 1980s with the signature fat down tubes that were just ridiculously bigger than other bikes at the time. Now, to the right is the 2020 XDURO Enduro 2.0 with about 220 miles on it. So this one's just a baby. And similarly, I have to say the pictures on the High Bike website do not do it justice. I thought it looked just okay in the photos when I was shopping around for a replacement. I was actually looking at the white and gray 2019 All Mountain 3.0, which had the Bosch motor instead of the Yamaha, but it ended up selling out before I could get one, so I went with this Enduro instead. So I was quite pleased when I received it and saw the paint job in person. The gray just looks upscale, and the bike is really sharp, way more so than online photos showed, in my opinion. In hindsight, I'm glad that I didn't get the All Mountain 3.0 as my second bike over this one because based on everything I've read, I really prefer the Yamaha motor over the Bosch because it seems to fit my style of riding, which is more of a lower pedaling cadence, and the Yamaha motors were purportedly, torque beasts. The other good thing about having the older bike with the PWX motor and the newer with the PWX2 was that they're virtually identical in terms of footprint, and all the engine bolt mount locations, etc., are completely interchangeable between these two bikes. And being a motocross guy who hates downtime and I'm often breaking stuff, just being able to swap parts back and forth and have a spare that I can pillage from time to time, it's a huge plus for me. Okay, so as far as suspension, these bikes are really similar. In fact, for the front fork, they both have the same RockShox Yari. However, the All Mountain has 160 millimeters of travel, and the Xduro Enduro boasts 180 millimeters. At the time when I bought the All Mountain, I thought it was the second most aggressive downhiller in the high bike lineup, behind just the downhill model. But later, I actually learned that an Xduro Enduro has the second place spot in terms of aggressive downhill geometry. So, do I notice a difference? Yes, I'm about 220 pounds and I have the two bikes set up exactly the same for my weight. And the Enduro definitely sits taller and I have way less paddle strikes. I actually measured the ground clearance between both bikes and I found the Enduro sat a full 1 inch higher off the ground than the All Mountain. Also, they both have the same exact length crank arms at 165 millimeters. So it's not the crank arms making the difference, it's really the difference in suspension. Now, you might notice my crank arms are not factory on the All Mountain, and I have it pimped out with Hope crank arms. But I can tell you they're also 165 millimeters like the originals. In fact, that's why I chose the Hope brand, and I'm really pleased with them. So why did I replace the crank arms on the All Mountain but not on the Enduro? So when I received the All Mountain, I accidentally cross-threaded one of the pedals, putting it together, and I ruined the threads on the crank arm and on the pedal. So I shopped around. I got the Hope e-bike crank arms, which were about $200, and the Miser pedals for maybe there was something like $30. And I liked the pedal so much that right away that's the first upgrade I did on the Enduro from day one. So I highly recommend these Miser flat shoe pedals, and you can get them in all sorts of colors. The rear shock is slightly different between the two bikes, with the All Mountain having the RockShox Deluxe RT, and the Enduro has the RockShox Super Deluxe Select Plus, which I definitely think looks more badass, but to be honest, I'm equally happy with both. Although technically, I would say the Enduro has the better shock. I will say the All Mountain shock has a really cool sound to it when I hit big roots, and I have no idea if it's normal, but you can hear a little burst of air each time it's compressed. It's like psst, psst. To me, it sounds like the air brakes on a roller coaster, but my friends would probably say it's groaning from carrying my big fat butt around. Both bikes have 27-inch wheels with Alex rims and Maxxis Minion DHF tires with the same tread pattern. However, this time I'll give the All Mountain the edge because it has the wider 2.8 tires and the Enduro has more narrow 2.6. Not a huge difference on paper, but I've crashed once on the Enduro with the front tire washing out at high speed. And maybe it was rider error or maybe it was the fatter tire that would have helped in that situation. But I'm sure some would argue the more narrow tire somehow makes it more maneuverable. But I don't really notice on a trail. And if I was given a choice, I'd probably pick the wider tires every time. Both of these bikes have the same Yamaha lithium ion 500 watt hour battery, and both have Yamaha mid motors with 80 newton meters of torque. And like I said before, they're the same fit and look nearly identical, except the All Mountain with the PWX has silver letters, and the newer Enduro has the PWX2 with the red letters. So basically, this little round plate right here is the only visual difference. Other than the subtle difference in appearance, they both output the same amount of power at 80 newton meters, but I would give the PWX2 the edge. More to the way it's tuned, the PWX2 gives more of a boost at high cadence, which you definitely notice, and you can even audibly hear it. I mean, it sounds like a mini turbo boost as the engine whir gets slightly louder, and you just feel like Superman when you hear that sound. One really nice feature that the XDURO Enduro has, thanks to the newer PWX2 setup, it comes with walk assist, which I've actually had to use a few times when I got on trails that were too wet to be riding, and I ended up walking my bike up, and it was really nice just to hold down the button on display, and the motor kicks in just ever so slightly to give you a little bit of a boost, making it easier to walk up the hill. Overall, that's a really cool feature. Another feature that the PWX2 setup has is automatic mode, which automatically adjusts the level of assist depending on how you're riding the bike. So if you're going downhill, it might drop you to a lower eco assist, and then when climbing, it might switch you to the extra power mode. I only used this once before, but it's because mostly I find the standard level of assist is perfect for me in my riding, and usually I only put it in extra mode when I'm kind of overdone at riding and I want to zip back to my truck as soon as possible. That's really one of the great things about e-biking. You can push your limits a bit more, maybe ride a little deeper in the woods than you normally would, and the bike will rescue you later in the day when you're completely exhausted. Now, the biggest differences that I like to point out are in regards to how well either of these climb and descend. The Enduro, as I've alluded to already, has more aggressive geometry for downhill. The bars rest higher, which helps you, when your nose is going straight down a steep face. However, when you're going uphill, I found myself initially lifting the front tire off the ground and accidentally wheeling. So, this only took me a day or two to get used to, though. Um, and I learned to lower my upper body weight closer to the bars when I'm ascending up hills. On the other hand, the bars on the All Mountain sit lower. In fact, it's more simple to climb because of this. However, for me, I find that my wrists hurt after long rides, and it puts more of my weight forward, which is good for uphill, but uncomfortable for long flat sections. And after putting like 20 miles or so in, I definitely feel it. If you ride motorcycles at all, I compare the feeling to riding a crotch rocket for a long time versus, say, a touring bike where you sit more upright. After a few weeks, my wrists were conditioned, but after riding the Enduro for a spell and then going back to the All Mountain, I definitely prefer the comfort of the Enduro. The All Mountain, however, is a great climber, but the other big difference between the bikes is with the gearing. Even though the Enduro geometry seems better suited for downhill than uphill, I did find the gearing good for climbing steep hills. In fact, I mean, look at the size of the largest gear in the back cassette compared to the All Mountain. This really comes in handy on steep climbs, and it helps me get out of binds more often. I've actually thought I'd like to convert the All Mountain to this same cassette. However, it's not that simple because the Enduro is a 12-speed derailleur with only one gear in the front, versus the All Mountain is a 20-speed with two gears up front. I actually find myself never using the larger gear on the front of the All Mountain, and I'd gladly forego the 20-speed to have the same exact setup as my Enduro. But that's just me. Another key difference between the bikes is the brakes. The All Mountain uses Shimano MT520 brakes with MT501 levers, which are shorter, but I actually love that as they're perfect for just using my index and middle fingers. In contrast, the Enduro has Tektro Orion brakes with the Tektro hydraulic levers, which are longer and you have to reach a bit further for them, and you actually have to squeeze them a bit harder to make them work. The brake levers on the All Mountain are very spongy and you have to pull them in a lot before you feel them engage. But I have smaller fingers and I actually love this feature as I can rest my fingers on them and I can even pull them quite a bit in without the brakes actually accidentally engaging. Now, mountain bike experts will tell you not to hold your finger on your levers, when you're going down over obstacles because you might accidentally squeeze them on hard landings. Uh, but it's something I've always done racing motocross, good or bad. And the fact they don't immediately engage on the all mountain is something I actually like. Although, after you ride the enduro, which engages much sooner, and you hop back to the all mountain, you might initially feel like the brakes aren't really working, but they are. I actually found the better levers on the Enduro took a little bit to adjust to when I first started riding the bike, but after a couple of days of riding, I did get used to it pretty quickly. I think on paper, I would say the Enduro has the better setup, and probably most riders would prefer it, except, weirdos like me. In any case, they're both good, and I've never felt nervous that I wouldn't be able to stop on either bike. Other than these things, pretty much everything else is identical on the two bikes, including the 780 millimeter bars, which I find really comfortable, other than the further reach I mentioned on the All Mountain, which is more about geometry of the bikes than the bars themselves. They both come with an XLC remote seat 31.6 millimeter dropper, and I like the feel of the lever, although I've heard some people don't like the placement of it because if you crash, it's the first thing that breaks. And if you look at my All Mountain right now, you can see the proof is in the pudding because indeed it's currently broken. And that's from me going over the bars, which I like to do from time to time. Now, for derailleurs, the All Mountain uses the Shimano Diore M6000 and the Enduro the SRAM SX Eagle. I really have nothing to say about either. I found them both equally good. My Enduro initially was skipping a few gears when I first got it, but I quickly resolved that with a couple turns of the knob on the handlebars, and I never looked back. Okay, so to wrap up, which bike should you get? Well, it really depends what you prefer. If you're doing long climbs, then you might prefer the All Mountain. Or maybe you're taking a ski lift up a mountain and you're just riding down all the time, so you might prefer the enduro in that case. But if you're into that, you might want to consider the more aggressive Haibike model, which is their downhill series with a super aggressive geometry for downhill. I do think of these two bikes here, the Enduro is a perfect match of both uphill and downhill. However, that's basically what an Enduro bike is after all. And personally, I think for my needs, the Enduro is the better all-around bike for the type of riding that I do. Don't get me wrong though, the All Mountain is sexy as hell and it turns a lot of heads at the track. You know what I think? I'm just gonna continue to ride them both, guys. Anyway, I hope this helps you decide what to get, or if you've been on the fence about buying either of these, I'm here to tell you you can't go wrong. If you've considered anything in the high bike line, I encourage you to just do it. You'll thank me later. Um, it'll change your life as it surely has done for mine. Well, thanks for watching, folks. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments below. Also, if you like my video, why not click the like button and consider subscribing to my channel? I'd really appreciate it. Take care, and hopefully I'll see you on the trails.